The chill of a Berlin winter crept through the cracks in the wall, as Max Richter crouched low behind a dumpster, watching the enemy safehouse across the street. His eyes darted back and forth, scanning for any sign of movement. He glanced at his watch, 23:45. It had been 3 hours since he had last seen Anna Weiss, his partner in this dangerous game of cat and mouse. She was supposed to have infiltrated the safe house by now, planted the bug, and made her escape. But as the minutes ticked by, Max couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Dmitri Orlov, the ruthless officer who had been doggedly pursuing them for weeks, was getting impatient. Max could see the frustration in the way he paced back and forth in front of the safe house, his hands tucked tightly into his coat pockets. The chief had flown in from Moscow earlier that day, and Orlov knew that he was running out of time to retrieve the list of double agents hidden somewhere within the safehouse walls. Max could almost taste the desperation in the air. As if sensing Max's gaze, Orlov turned abruptly and stared directly at him. For a split second, their eyes locked. Max felt a chill run down his spine. He knew that if Orlov suspected he was a spy, it would be all over. He had to act fast. Quickly, he ducked behind the dumpster and disappeared from view. Meanwhile, inside the safe house, Anna was furiously working to decode a series of encrypted messages she had retrieved from the safe house computer. She had managed to make some progress, but the encryption was proving to be exceptionally difficult. She could feel the clock ticking, and she knew that every minute counted. Outside, Max crept along the side of the building, staying in the shadows. He paused at a window, carefully peering inside. To his relief, he saw Anna huddled over the bug, making sure it was securely planted. She flashed him a reassuring smile before disappearing back into the shadows. Max signaled to her that it was safe to make her exit, and she quickly slipped out of the safe house. As they hurried away from the stronghold, Max couldn't help but marvel at her skill. It had been a close call, but they had managed to outsmart Orlov once again. However, he knew that their luck couldn't hold out forever. The next time, it might be the other way around. Back at their safe house, they stripped off their disguises and collapsed into chairs, exhausted from the adrenaline-fueled mission. Anna removed the memory card from the bug and plugged it into her laptop. "I think I have it," she said, studying the decryption program intently. "Just a few more minutes." Max paced the room, anxious to know what they had discovered. He glanced at his watch again and sighed. It was going to be a long night. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Anna let out a triumphant whoop. "Got it!" she exclaimed. "The list is on here." Carefully, they debriefed the information they had retrieved. The list was a catalog of double agents operating within the state itself, as well as several high-ranking officials who had been selling state secrets to the West. It was a devastating blow to Orlov and his organization, and it meant that the tide of the war might finally be turning in their favor. But they both knew that their work was far from over. They still had to get the information back to their superiors without being caught by Orlov. They decided to transmit the data via a secure dead drop location, deep in the heart of a Berlin park. Max would act as the courier, while Anna stayed behind to monitor movements. As Max crept through the shadows of the park, he felt a sense of both urgency and relief. Urgency because he knew that every second counted, and Orlov was closing in fast. Relief because he knew that this mission would finally put an end to their cat-and-mouse game, and they could both return to their normal lives. He reached the dead drop site and carefully placed the memory card in its hiding place. As he returned to their safe house, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride swell in his chest. They had done it. They had beaten Orlov and saved the world from a major intelligence disaster. But as he rounded the corner and saw Anna waiting for him, he noticed something amiss. Her usually confident demeanor was replaced by a look of concern, and she was pacing frantically. "What's wrong?" he asked, alarmed. Anna took a deep breath and spoke in a shaky voice. "I think we've been compromised." Max's heart sank. "What do you mean?" "I just got a notification from our handler. They've been trying to reach us for the past hour, but we haven't responded. They think something might be wrong." Fear gripped Max as he considered the implications. If their cover had been blown, It meant that they were no longer safe, and Orlov would be on their tail. He had to think fast. "Do we have a backup plan?" he asked, trying to sound calm. Anna shook her head. "We didn't anticipate this. Our only hope is to get to the extraction point, and hope our people can get us out of here." Together, they packed up their belongings and hurried to the extraction point. As they raced through the streets of Berlin, Max couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. He glanced over his shoulder several times, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Maybe it was just paranoia setting in. They reached the extraction point, a deserted warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Max took a deep breath and stepped inside, his heart pounding. The air was thick with anticipation and tension. They waited for what seemed like an eternity, but finally, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was their handler, a tall, imposing man with a calm demeanor. "You've been running a bit hot, you two," he said, his voice low and steady. "What happened?" Anna and Max exchanged glances. There was no point in beating around the bush. "We think we were compromised," Anna said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to get out of here before Orlov finds us." Their handler nodded. "Understood. You two need to disappear for a while. We'll take care of things here. Get to a new safe house and wait for further instructions." Without another word, they turned and vanished into the night. As they made their way to the safe house, Max couldn't help but wonder if they had made it out in time. The thought of going back to their old lives, knowing what they now knew about Orlov and his organization, weighed heavily on his mind. But for now, they had to focus on staying alive and staying one step ahead of their enemy. The safe house was located in a small coastal town, far from the bustle of Berlin. It was an unassuming place, nestled between a fish market and a quaint bed and breakfast. Anna and Max exchanged glances as they let themselves in, each silently communicating their fears and concerns. They knew that they would have to wait for their handler to contact them with further instructions, but the waiting was agonizing. Days turned into weeks, and still they heard nothing. They began to wonder if they had been forgotten, or if Orlov had managed to track them down despite their best efforts. They couldn't help but feel a growing sense of helplessness and despair. In the meantime, they tried to keep themselves busy by blending in with the local community, taking up hobbies like fishing and painting. One morning, as they were sitting down to breakfast in the small kitchen of the safe house, their handler's voice crackled through a speaker. "Max? Anna? I've been meaning to check in, but things have been hectic. You both did an amazing job out there. I can't thank you enough." There was a brief pause before he continued. "Now, about your next mission." Max and Anna exchanged glances, their hearts racing. They had been hoping for news of their extraction, but it seemed they were not quite done yet. They listened intently as their handler laid out the details of their new mission, which involved infiltrating a high-level meeting of a rival organization. It seemed that Orlov was not the only threat they needed to worry about. As they prepared for their new assignment, they couldn't help but feel a sense of relief and purpose. Despite the danger, they knew that they were needed and that they could make a difference. They vowed to approach this mission with the same skill and determination that had served them so well in their previous encounter with Orlov. The day of the meeting arrived, and Max and Anna found themselves seated at a table in a lavish hotel, surrounded by some of the most powerful people in the world. They scanned the room, careful to avoid drawing attention to themselves, as they listened to the conversation unfold. It was clear that their presence was not going unnoticed, and they braced themselves for the inevitable confrontation. Just as they were beginning to feel overwhelmed, their handler's voice came through their earpieces. "You're doing great, Max. Just a little bit longer, and then we'll get you both out of there." With renewed confidence, they continued to listen and observe, waiting for the perfect opportunity to gather the intelligence that would bring down the rival organization and protect the world from yet another threat. As the night wore on, they grew increasingly weary, but they knew that they couldn't afford to let their guard down. They had come too far, and there was still work to be done. Finally, just as they were beginning to wonder if they would ever be able to extract themselves from the situation, their handler's voice came through once again. "It's time. Meet me at the extraction point in 15 minutes. They quickly rose from their chairs, making their way through the crowded room and out into the hotel lobby. They kept their heads down, blending in with the other guests as they made their way to the prearranged meeting spot. As they waited for their handler, they couldn't help but reflect on the night's events. They had faced danger and uncertainty at every turn, but they had persevered. They had proven that they were more than just agents. They were partners, and they were unstoppable together. Their handler, a man by the name of Richter, approached them, his expression unreadable. "Well done," he said, his voice laced with sarcasm. "You've managed to survive another mission. I'm impressed." He paused, his gaze flickering between them. "But your luck is about to run out." Before Max or Anna could react, Richter pulled out a gun and pointed it at them. "I'm sorry, but I can't let you live. Orlov has other plans for you." His finger tightened on the trigger. "Now, which of you is going to die first?" Time seemed to slow down as Max and Anna processed the shock of their handler's betrayal. They exchanged a glance, their hearts pounding in their chests. They knew they had to act fast, but they couldn't afford to rush their decision. "I'll go first," Max said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "I'll distract him while you make a run for it." Anna nodded in understanding. There was no time for argument. They both knew what they had to do. As Max moved into a fighting stance, ready to engage their handler, Anna took a step back, bracing herself for action. The seconds ticked by as they waited for the gunshot that would signal the beginning of the end. When it finally came, it was a deafening roar in the enclosed space. Max lunged forward, disarming their handler with a swift movement, but in their haste, he missed the knife that was already in the man's other hand. A searing pain coursed through Max's side as the blade found its target. Meanwhile, Anna took the opportunity to dart away from the scene, sprinting at full speed. Her heart pounded in her chest as she raced towards freedom, the sound of gunfire and shouting echoing behind her. She couldn't let herself think about Max or the man who had betrayed them both. All she could focus on was escape. As she rounded a corner, she nearly collided with another agent, their eyes meeting in surprise. For a moment, they both hesitated, but then the other agent lunged forward, knocking her to the ground and pinning her arms above her head. "It's over, Anna," the man hissed in her ear. "You're coming with me." Anna struggled against the agent's hold, her heart racing with fear and desperation. She couldn't believe that another one of their own would betray them so easily. As he dragged her down the hallway, she heard distant shouting and more gunshots, the sounds of the fight growing closer with every step. Finally, they reached a service elevator, the doors sliding open to reveal a group of armed men waiting inside. "Well done, Alex," their leader said, his voice cold and dismissive. "Now it's time to deliver our package." Anna's heart sank as they pushed her into the elevator, the doors closing behind her. She felt like she was trapped in a nightmare, unable to escape the inevitable fate that awaited her. As the elevator began its descent, she closed her eyes, steeling herself for whatever was to come. Meanwhile, back in the hallway, Max lay bleeding on the floor, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His handler stood over him, a satisfied smile on his face. "I'm sorry, Max," he said, sounding anything but. "It had to be this way." He knelt down, reaching for Max's gun, and as his fingers brushed against the cold metal, Max sprang to life, grappling with his handler and wresting the gun away from him. The two men rolled on the floor, their hands tangled in a desperate struggle for control. Max could feel the warmth of his own blood seeping through his shirt, but he refused to give up. He knew that if he let his handler take him alive, Orlov would find a way to make him talk. There was no other option but to fight to the death. As they continued to grapple, the elevator doors opened once again, revealing a stunned expression on Anna's face. She watched in horror as her partner and their handler struggled on the floor, their hands locked in a death grip around a weapon. In that moment, she knew there was no going back. She had to choose a side. Without hesitation, she dashed forward, kicking her captor in the chest and sending him sprawling across the floor. Max looked up at her in surprise, his face contorted with pain. "Go!" he gasped, pushing himself to his feet. "Get out of here!" Anna hesitated for only a moment before turning and sprinting down the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear Max and their handler exchanging shots behind her, the sound of their footsteps growing closer. She didn't dare look back, afraid that if she did, she might lose focus and be too late. Without thinking, she drew her weapon and began firing, her movements sharp and precise. The agents were caught off guard, their return fire barely registering a scratch as she ducked back behind cover. She knew she couldn't stay here, she had to keep moving. With her adrenaline pumping, she dashed down another hallway, praying that she would find an exit or someplace to hide. The sounds of gunfire and shouting grew distant, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being followed. She knew that she had to find a way to lose her pursuers, or risk being recaptured. As she rounded yet another corner, she saw a service door marked Maintenance, swinging open. Without hesitation, she darted inside, closing the door behind her. The darkness was suffocating, but she knew that it would provide her with the cover she needed. She could hear the sounds of the fight outside growing fainter, and for the first time since she had escaped, she allowed herself to believe that she might actually make it out alive. Carefully, she felt her way along the wall, searching for a light switch. Her fingers brushed against a panel, and she flicked it on, revealing a dimly lit maintenance closet. Shelves lined the walls, stacked high with boxes of tools and cleaning supplies. In the corner, she saw a ladder leading up to a hatch in the ceiling. Perhaps she could find a way out through the building's roof. As she climbed the ladder, her heart raced, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. She knew that at any moment, her pursuers could find their way in here. The hatch creaked open, revealing a sliver of moonlit sky above. She poked her head out, taking in her surroundings. The roof was mostly empty, save for a few ventilation units and a few stray pieces of debris. She could see the tops of nearby buildings in the distance, and she knew that she had to find a way down. Deciding to play it safe, she carefully made her way across the roof, avoiding any places where she might be easily spotted. As she searched for a fire escape or another exit, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Her paranoia grew with each passing moment, her heart racing in her chest. Finally, she spotted a rusty old fire escape ladder leading down to the alley below. Grasping the ladder tightly, she began her descent, her movements slow and deliberate. The cool night air brushed against her face as she descended, the sounds of the city below washing over her. She could see the lights of a nearby diner, its neon sign flickering enticingly. Her stomach growled at the thought of food, but she knew that she couldn't risk being seen. As she reached the bottom of the ladder, she peered around the corner of the building, looking for any sign of her pursuers. The alley was empty, but she could still hear distant shouts and gunfire, the sound of the battle raging on above. Shivering from both cold and fear, she crept across the alley and ducked into the diner, hoping to blend in with the other patrons. She found a booth in the back corner, away from any windows, and slid in, ordering a cup of coffee and trying to appear as nonchalant as possible. As she sipped her drink, she kept an eye on the door, her heart racing each time it swung open. Minutes turned into hours, and she began to feel a bit more at ease, the adrenaline starting to fade from her system. Just as she was about to relax a little, she felt a hand on her shoulder. Startled, she spun around, her heart hammering in her chest. It was Max. His face was bruised and bloody, but he managed a weak smile. "I thought you might need some company," he said, sliding into the booth across from her. "I've been following you, trying to make sure you weren't being followed." She exhaled shakily, relief flooding through her. "Thank you," she whispered. "I didn't know what else to do." Max reached across the table, taking her hand in his. His touch was gentle and reassuring. "It's okay," he said, his voice soft. "We'll figure something out. We always do." They sat in silence for a moment, lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the sounds of the city continued unabated. The waitress came by, filling their coffee cups without a word. It felt almost normal, sitting there with Max, as if they were any other couple sharing a quiet moment together. But she knew that nothing would ever be normal again. Not for her. As she stared into Max's eyes, she felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She wanted to tell him everything about her past, about the facility, about her plans to take down the Institute. But she knew that it wasn't safe. Not yet. Instead, she forced a small smile and leaned forward, pressing her lips against his. His mouth was warm and familiar, and for a moment she could almost pretend that they were anywhere but here. When they finally pulled apart, she looked into his eyes, searching for some hint of what they might do next. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We can't stay in the city, not with them looking for us. We need to find someplace safe." Max nodded, his expression grave. "I know a place," he said. "A cabin up in the mountains. It'll give us some time to plan our next move." The idea of hiding out in the mountains sounded appealing, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. They needed to do more than just survive. They needed to bring down the Institute and end the nightmare for everyone. "We can't just hide," she said, her voice firm. "We have to fight back." Max looked at her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "You're right," he said. "We can't let them win." Together, they formulated a plan. They would gather supplies and weapons, and strike at the Institute's weakest points, their research facilities and their leadership. They knew it would be dangerous, perhaps even suicidal, but they also knew that they had nothing left to lose. As they sipped their coffee, they made a list of targets and began to devise strategies for taking them down. Outside, the city bustled with activity, oblivious to the danger that lurked within its midst. The diner filled with customers, their laughter and conversation filling the air like music. But for Anna and Max, their thoughts were elsewhere. They knew that their lives would never be the same again. They had become part of something bigger than themselves, and there was no turning back. As the night wore on, they finished their coffee and made their way back out into the alley. Max peered around the corner, ensuring that the coast was clear, before they darted across the street and disappeared into the shadows. They moved swiftly and silently, like ghosts haunting the city streets. Their mission was clear, their determination unwavering. They would bring the Institute down, no matter the cost. Hours later, they reached the safe house Max had spoken of earlier. It was a small, dilapidated cabin nestled deep in the mountains, hidden away from civilization. The air was crisp and clean, devoid of the pollution and noise of the city. As they stepped inside, they felt a weight lift from their shoulders, a sense of relief washing over them. This was their base of operations, their sanctuary in the midst of the storm. They spent the rest of the night gathering supplies and weapons, carefully cataloging their finds. Max had contacts within the underground resistance, and he was able to secure a variety of firearms, explosives, and tactical gear. They also found a map with several marked locations, the Institute's research facilities and command centers. Their plan was coming together, falling into place like a puzzle. As the first rays of dawn peeked through the cabin windows, they sat down at a makeshift desk, poring over their maps and strategies. The weight of their task was not lost on them, but they were determined. They had each other, and they had a purpose. They would not let the Institute continue their heinous experiments, their twisted pursuit of power. They would be the ones to end it. Anna looked up from her maps, meeting Max's eyes. There was a steely determination there, a resolve that she hadn't seen in anyone else. "We can do this," she said, her voice steady. "We can bring them down." Max nodded, his expression grim. "Yes," he replied. "We can. And we will." Together, they continued to plan their assault, honing their strategies and sharpening their skills. They trained relentlessly, running drills and practicing tactical maneuvers until they were as sharp as razors. They knew that they could not afford a single mistake, not against an enemy as ruthless and cunning as the Institute. They would have to be at the top of their game at all times. As the weeks passed, their strength grew, their bond deepening. They became a team, a family of sorts, bound together by their shared experiences and their unwavering determination to see this through. They knew that their actions could mean the difference between life and death for countless innocent people, and they were prepared to give everything they had to make that difference. They infiltrated the Institute's facilities, slipping past security undetected and striking at the heart of their operations. Their attacks were swift and brutal, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. The resistance fighters they had aligned themselves with cheered their victories, spreading news of their daring exploits across the city and beyond. But for Anna and Max, the celebrations were bittersweet. They knew that each victory brought them closer to the ultimate confrontation with the Institute's most formidable adversary, their leader, Oswald E. Payne. The man was a genius, a ruthless strategist who had built the Institute into the monster it was today. Taking him down would not be easy, and it would certainly come at a great cost. Despite the odds stacked against them, they refused to back down. They continued to train, honing their skills and sharpening their minds. They gathered intelligence on Payne, learning everything they could about his habits, his routines, his weaknesses. And as the day of the final showdown drew closer, they knew that they would have to be at the top of their game if they were to have any hope of emerging victorious. The night before the assault, they sat together in the cabin, sipping coffee and reviewing their plans one last time. The air was thick with tension, the weight of the responsibility they bore pressing down on them like a physical force. But they were not alone, they had each other, and they had the knowledge that they were doing the right thing. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Max asked her, his voice barely above a whisper. "We could turn back, you know. We could find another way to fight back." Anna looked at him, her eyes filled with determination. "No," she replied. "There is no other way. We have to do this." He nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "Then let's make it count," he said, reaching out to take her hand. "Let's make sure that the Institute never rebuilds itself." They spent the rest of the night preparing themselves mentally, meditating and visualizing the upcoming battle. They went over their weapons and equipment one last time, checking and rechecking everything to ensure that it was in perfect working order. As the first light of dawn crept through the cabin windows, they stood together, facing each other. "Are you ready?" Max asked, his voice steady. "Yes," Anna replied, her voice firm. "Let's do this." They moved swiftly and silently through the Institute facility, avoiding security cameras and guards with ease. Their training had honed their skills to a razor-sharp edge, and they flowed through the complex like ghosts, disappearing into the shadows when danger threatened. They reached Payne's office without incident, the air thick with tension as they paused outside the door. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Max whispered to her one last time. "I'm not afraid," she replied, her voice steady. "Let's end this." They nodded at each other, taking a deep breath, and then burst into the office. Payne looked up in surprise, his expression a mix of shock and fury. "You're too late," he growled, reaching for his weapon. "We'll see about that," Anna said, her voice cold as steel. "It's time you paid for what you've done." The battle was brutal and relentless, either side giving an inch. Max and Anna fought side by side, their skills complementing each other perfectly. They dodged bullets and threw punches, their movements a blur of precision and power. But as the fight wore on, it became clear that Payne was too strong, too skilled for them to defeat alone. As they fought, they caught glimpses of resistance fighters outside the office, trying to break in to lend their aid. It was a desperate gamble, but it was their only chance. They managed to distract Payne long enough to unlock the door, and soon the resistance fighters burst into the room, guns blazing. Anna and Max pressed their advantage, using the element of surprise to their advantage. They attacked Payne from multiple angles, forcing him to retreat. But the man was resilient, and he managed to keep them at bay for just long enough. The room was filled with the deafening sound of gunfire, the smell of cordite and blood. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of violence, they managed to overpower Payne. His gun clattered to the floor, his body limp and defeated. For a moment, all was silent, the only sound the ragged breathing of the survivors. Anna and Max exchanged a weary glance, their hearts racing with adrenaline and exhaustion. They knew that the victory was bittersweet, the Institute was far from defeated. But they had struck a blow against the monster, and for now, that was enough. They turned to the resistance fighters, their shoulders slumped in relief, and nodded gratefully. Together, they would rebuild the world that the Institute had destroyed. The aftermath of the battle was gruesome. Blood stained the carpet and walls of Payne's office, a testament to the brutality of the fight. Broken furniture littered the floor, and shattered glass glinted in the harsh light. The sounds of moaning and crying echoed down the hallway as medics rushed to tend to the wounded. Anna and Max found a quiet corner of the room where they could collect their thoughts. They sat down heavily on a battered couch, their eyes locked on the floor. The weight of what they had just done pressed down on them like an anchor. "Do you think we made a difference?" Max asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Anna looked at him, her expression distant. "I don't know," she replied. "But at least we tried. And now it's up to us to make sure that the Institute never rises again." Outside, the sun rose over the horizon, casting a warm, golden light over facility. It was a beautiful day, and yet the air felt heavy with the weight of what had happened. The resistance fighters began the long process of securing the complex, disarming traps and disabling security systems. They knew that their work was far from over, but for now, they could take a moment to catch their breath. Anna and Max stayed in the quiet corner of the room, lost in their own thoughts. They knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but they were no longer alone. They had each other, and they had the knowledge that they had done the right thing. They would rebuild the world together, and in the end, they would prevail. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it.